What's going on, YouTube? Back. This week we're going to talk a little bit about a subject that we talked about in the past, micromanaging. Why micromanaging is bad. Why, as a supervisor or manager, you should not be a micromanager. That's the number one way to show your team that you regret ever hiring them and make them regret ever showing up to work. Micromanaging stifles your team's success, it limits their creativity, and it has adverse reactions of causing your team to search employment elsewhere, which causes high turnover rates. How are some ways that we can prevent ourselves from becoming the micromanaging manager? People love being babysat. Your employees totally enjoy having their every move scrutinized. One thing that you can do as a supervisor or manager is to make sure that when assigning goals to your team, you set clear expectations. Setting clear expectations lets them know exactly what's expected out of them, and at the same time, gives them the time period in which you expect these things to be taken care of. Trust your team. These are teammates that you either picked, they were hired within the organization due to their qualifications, or whatever. Wherever they are part of the team, they clearly brought something to the table that is beneficial to the entire team. Because of this, you need to trust that these team members do the jobs that they're qualified to do. When you micromanage your team members, that does not give them trust. That does not make them feel comfortable doing their jobs, and they cannot flourish. When they don't flourish as a team, then you don't flourish as a supervisor. The number one reason why some teams' goals fail is because there's not clear communication. You need to make sure that you improve how you communicate with your team. Ensure that they understand what's expected out of them. Ensure that they understand what timeline that they have to work with, what resources they have availability to, or what resources can you offer them. When you communicate these things to your team, then everybody is on the same page. And as long as everybody is on the same page, that minimizes the group talk, that minimizes the excuses as to why goals are not being met. As a supervisor or manager, you need to make sure that you provide support, not supervision. I know those words seem like they're interchangeable, but they're really not. A good supervisor supports their team. They put them in line with the resources that they need, which I've spoken about already. The resources that they need in able to reach the goals that are at hand. If your team doesn't meet goals, is it your team's fault? No, it's not your team's fault. It's your fault, because somewhere you fail to give them the resources, to give them the tools that they need in order to become successful. And when you fail to do that, not only have you failed your team, but you failed yourself. Being able to do that takes a certain level of self-awareness. You need to be self-aware of your own limitations. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to collaborate with your team. Find out if you can come up with the best solution. Sometimes the best solution is not always your solution, which is why you need to make sure that you communicate with your team members, that you talk to your team members, get their input, find out from them how they feel things are going, what direction they think that you need to travel in. Focus on big picture goals. Yes, we have short-term goals and long-term goals. And you always want to make sure that you meet your short-term goals. Two reasons for making sure that you meet your short-term goals is your short-term goals should align with what your long-term goals are. With that being said, making sure that you're meeting your short-term goals will also ensure that you're capable of meeting your long-term goals. So, you do need to be aware of what your big picture or long-term goals are. That way you can make sure that you're making the incremental steps to reach those goals. That way you can achieve that big picture goal. You need to make sure that you build confidence with your team members through training. Yes, people have base level training to enter the workforce. through school, through other jobs. However, every organization does things differently. Maybe your organization does things in a manner that some of your team members are not 100% familiar with. That is when you need to make sure that you train your team. You need to ensure the proper training for your team. Part of training is making sure that your team understands what it is that they're being trained on. When you get through training your team should in turn be able to train other team members so that they can understand what's expected out of them in the same way that you expect them to understand what's expected out of them. Therefore, you need to make sure that you build your team's confidence in their training. Do frequent check-ins, get frequent feedback, make sure that they understand exactly what it is that you expect them to do. Another subject that I talk about often is accountability. People need to be held accountable. Part of accountability is being able to reward people for their successes. Make no mistake about it. Yes, accountability does mean that when you fall short of something, when you fall short of a goal, you let people know that they fell short. You help get them realigned so that they can reach whatever goal that they make. However, when you reward progress also, that is still a form of letting everybody know that you're holding them accountable, not just for their successes, not just for their failures, but also their successes. When people know that they're being held accountable for their successes, they tend to work harder to make sure that they have more successes than failures. You also need to be on top of noticing when there is a significant failure that needs to be addressed. Not every failure needs to be addressed. Some things are minor pitfalls, and you need to have the wherewithal to understand what's a minor pitfall and what's something that can completely derail the project. If you provide feedback, then you will notice when these things fall short. That way you can address these issues and get them corrected in a timely manner so that you can still reach your company's goals. As a supervisor, you should be synonymous with a coach. You want to be looked at as a coach. When your team isn't doing well, you need to provide them the tools, as I've said multiple times, so that they can do well. Provide them feedback, provide them suggestions. There's a way to provide suggestions without making it seem like you're being overbearing. You could try something as simple as, well, hey, I noticed we're having a little trouble in this area. Have we tried this, or what other options have we looked at? Put it on your team member. In that statement, you just heard me say we. A tool that I like to utilize is the we method. I always address things as we, because even though they're your team, you're still part of that team, even if you're the team leader. That is your team as well. You are part of that team. Therefore, everything that happens with the team is a we. It's not an I, it's not a you. You all are working together towards this common goal. So therefore, always utilize we. How can we meet this goal? How can we make sure that we reach whatever standard we need to get to? Because when your team fails, it's not just your team failing and nobody bothers to mention that you were in charge of the team. In most cases, when your team fails, you're the one that takes the brunt of the blame because you're the one in charge of the team. So therefore, there's a we to this aspect. We need to make sure that we always utilize a we mentality. Most importantly, to avoid micromanagement, it takes a certain dose of self-awareness, like I said. You also need to make sure that you set clear boundaries for yourself. Make sure that you're not becoming a micromanager. Check with your team. Find out if you're being too overbearing. You don't have to be as direct as saying, hey, am I being too overbearing with you? No, that's just dumb. What you do want to do is ask them if they're having any troubles. Ask them if there's anything that they need your help with. Trust their answer. Like I said, trust in your team. If they tell you no, we have it, we're working our way through it, you have to trust that. Do your check-in. Give them check-ins to make sure that their progress is still progressing in the right direction. A good supervisor or manager usually has a good team behind them. So your ability to be a good supervisor or a good manager relies on your ability to properly manage or supervise your team so that your team does the things that are necessary to achieve the goal of the organization. Okay, YouTube, this week we talked about micromanagement, some ways to avoid micromanagement. Next week, we're going to talk about some training activities, some things that you can do to help adult learners learn whatever they need to learn. So until next week, make sure that you subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and tune in for another episode of Executive Edge. I've been Tony, and I'll see you next week.